Hello, Mithril here once again, and it's time for some more Secret of Evermore demos. This time we'll be going over the various alchemy formulas in the game. In most standard RPGs, you have a magic system. You have your list of spells, they cost a particular amount of MP, fairly basic. This is what you had in Secret of Mana, for example. Secret of Evermore instead employs an alchemy system. Rather than a single pool of magic points, you instead have a pool of various alchemical reagents. Each formula costs some combination of ingredients. It's more complicated as such, and yet a rather fascinating system. I always thought it was really cool when I played this as a kid, so let's get right to it. Since it can be a bit complicated to say exactly where each formula is found, each formula will be accompanied by a timestamp showing what episode of the LP I found it in and at what point, so if you need to see just how to get each one, that should lead you right to it. With that, there's 34 formulas we need to go through, so let's not waste any more time. Flash is the first alchemy formula obtained in the game, given to you by Fire Eyes in her village. Unless you're using weird exploits of some sort, this formula cannot be missed. Flash requires 1 part wax and 2 parts oil, and upon casting, send small fireballs to seek out targets. Given it's an early game formula, it's fairly weak and mostly just good for early targets. It is notable that despite being named Flash, it is the slowest of the missile type attack spells, which gives it the strange caveat that on rare occasions, a target may outrun it and thus avoid damage. Such is fairly rare though, and I've never actually seen it happen myself. Hardball is obtained from an alchemist living in a cave in the Bugmuck. You don't have to speak with him, so this one's optional, but not permanently missable. Hardball requires 1 part crystal and 1 part clay, and will send fast-moving projectiles at targets. The good news, since it's a 1-in-1 formula, you can store a lot of uses of it. The bad news, a Hardball is the weakest offensive formula in the game, only doing a couple hundred points of damage even at max level. The low ingredient cost, though, can make it decent early on when you don't have many formulas to work with. Acid Rain is taught by an alchemist in a secret alcove in the upper cliffs of the Sandpits in Prehistoria, found soon after defeating Thrax. This one too is optional, but not permanently missable. Acid Rain requires 1 part ash and 3 parts water, and causes a downpour of acid on targets. The ingredient cost is a double-edged sword, as they are cheap and plentiful ingredients. However, using 3 water per cast can eat your supply really fast, and it's better used in other formulas. While Acid Rain doesn't really have that much attack power, it does have the longest attack animation of damaging formulas, which can be used to tie up targets while you sneak in a quick heal or buff spell. Cure is taught from 2 possible sources, either from Strongheart in the South Jungle after you've rescued him from Thrax, or the fish vendor in the Nobilia marketplace will sell you the formula for 150 jewels if you didn't get it earlier. Either way, it's optional but not permanently missable. Cure takes 2 parts root and 1 part oil, and simply cures negative status effects such as poison, plague, or confound. Simple but useful early on, especially with all the poisonous spiders one encounters in both Prehistoria and Antiqua. Defend is given to the player by an alchemist in Fire Eyes' village. He appears in a hidden grove off the west side of the village, but only shows up after Thrax has been defeated. The formula is optional, but not permanently missable. Defend uses 1 part clay and 1 part ash, and gives a defensive buff for 60 seconds. Leveling this formula up heightens the power of the defense buff. It's pretty decent to have on hand for a while, and is the only real defensive formula you get for a long time. Heal is taught by an alchemist in the Mammoth Graveyard right after defeating the Viper Commander. Under normal circumstances, this formula cannot be missed. Heal takes 1 part root and 1 part water, and restores HP to the target. The more you level this spell, the more it heals, and it'll quickly outdo your early healing items. The low ingredient cost makes this formula extremely useful, possibly even for most of the game if you keep it leveled enough. Levitate comes from an alchemist on the top of the volcano in Prehistoria. Generally, the story guides you to where you have to get this formula, though using various exploits can get you out of having to learn it. It's fairly convoluted, however, as it requires using a difficult-to-perform exploit multiple times to get past boulders, as well as finding a workaround to avoid having to fight Tiny to get the diamond eyes. Levitate requires 1 part water and 1 part mud pepper. The only use of the spell is to levitate large boulders, and that's pretty much it. It's basically a story progression formula used to lift plot boulders. Speed is taught by an alchemist in a hidden passage found in the volcanic caves. Notably, most of the volcano becomes inaccessible after defeating Magmar, including the area the alchemist is hidden in. As such, speed is the first permanently missable formula in the game. Speed costs 1 part wax and 2 parts water. Upon use, the target's agility is increased, raising their hit and evasion ratios. Leveling the formula raises the power of the evasion boost. Duration for this spell, though, that's an oddity. It's supposed to last for a flat 45 seconds, but instead the code counts frames, is for some reason different between the PAL and NTSC versions of the game, and uses a starting time value based on the dog's defense. I'd really love to know what exactly happened to screw up the code for this formula so much. Crush has learned from Blimp in his new home in Antiqua. Ordinarily you have to meet up with him, so we'll make a bridge leading to the desert, but there are apparently exploits that can let you skip this. However, under normal play, Crush cannot be missed. Crush uses 1 part wax and 1 part limestone, and creates a giant stone fist that smashes enemies from above. Crush is pretty useful for a long while due to being a 1-in-1 formula, and doing a lot of damage as you start leveling it up. It does, however, start tapering off in usefulness later, as Blimp is the only one to sell limestone, and you start getting stronger attack formulas as well. Sting is taught by an alchemist in the Desert of Doom, found at 1 of 2 particular oases. The easiest way to find him is to enter the desert from the south end, go to the oasis next to the ferryman, then go northeast until you find another oasis. From here, head due north, and you should find yet another oasis with the alchemist. While it thus can be inconvenient to find, Sting is not permanently missable. Sting uses 2 parts water and 1 part vinegar, and causes a beehive to appear over targets, sending out a swarm of bees to attack. The formula is fairly strong, doing more damage on average than Crush. And the animation can tie up targets for a short period as well. However, being a 2-in-1 formula that requires water, a reagent used in a lot of healing formulas, can make it troublesome. So too can the fact that there are relatively few merchants that sell vinegar, so coming by it can be a bit of a thing. Atlas is taught by a rogue hiding behind a bunch of crates in the Nobilia Marketplace Inn. A spider wandering around hints you to go check it out. This formula is not permanently missable, but completely optional. Atlas requires 1 part ash and 1 part Atlas amulet. The spell can only be used on the boy, and doing so will give him a high strength buff for 90 seconds. The buff scales pretty nicely as you level it up as well. There are some weird points to this formula though, as well as some issues that I think I was wrong about during the LP. First, it doesn't seem like the rogue actually charges you more for later amulets. I could have sworn I remembered that being a thing. Notably, however, he will only sell you 3 amulets at a time, meaning that in general, you'll only have 3 uses of Atlas before you have to go back for more ingredients, as he's the only vendor to sell them. At 100 jewels per amulet, and having to cast the spell 489 times to max it out, doing so makes this a very expensive one to finish leveling. The other part was a miscommunication about the lowering attack issue. I was told that when Atlas wears off, it'll actually lower your attack below what it previously was, but there are some particulars there. As best I can tell, the issue comes into play if you save the game while Atlas is in effect, then reload. The game will still think Atlas is going, but you won't have the attack boost from it. Thus, when the spell wears off, your attack will then drop by the value of the boost. This is also how the rollover glitch is triggered. If Atlas boosts your attack more than your base attack power and you do this, your attack will drop below 0, and thus loop back around to 65,536 strength. Atlas is weird, yo. Revive is taught by Blimp after you've reunited with the dog and defeated Vigor. Visiting him again in his cave in Antiqua, he'll teach you the spell. This one's optional but not permanently missable. Revive uses 3 parts root and 1 part bone. The formula can revive the dog if he's been knocked out, healing him for more HP depending on the level of the spell. The spell, however, is a fairly niche thing, only really useful if you're just tearing through the dog biscuits. It also takes 3 roots per cast, which there are generally better and less costly formulas to use those on. And if you actually want to level this formula, well, you're going to be there a while because you can only cast it if the dog is out of HP. So, yeah, that one's going to be tedious. And will also mean purposefully hurting the dog a lot without healing him. You monster. I felt bad enough having to do it just the one time for this demo. Revealer is taught by Madronius in Horus Highwater's camp. Technically, this formula is permanently missable. We'll get to the reasons why in a moment. Revealer uses 2 parts ash and 1 part wax, and it's used to reveal secret bridges while traversing the Great Pyramid and the Hall of Colossia. Leveling this formula up has no effect. Strictly speaking, this is just a plot progression formula, but one that is not technically necessary. If you know where the bridges are, you can just cross over without revealing them. If you do this and thus complete both the Great Pyramid and the Hall of Colossia, Madronius will leave the camp after you've obtained the Diamond Eyes, making the formula inaccessible, as the game is reasonably sure you'd have had it by then. Whoops. Fireball is taught by Madronius' brother in a hidden room of the Hall of Colossia. It should be noted that he only shows up if you've met with Madronius and talked to him until he specifically mentions his brother's whereabouts, which means that this one is, in a more roundabout way, also permanently missable. Anyway, Fireball uses 1 part brimstone and 2 parts ash, and as the name implies, it throws fast-moving fireballs at targets. A decently strong attack, the ingredients aren't all that hard to come by, and if leveled up properly, it can find use through the later parts of Antiqua and early parts of Gothica as well. Drain is taught by an alchemist in a cave on the western bank in Antiqua, requiring the bronze axe to break a barrier blocking the entrance. Drain is an odd case, as it is very briefly temporarily missable, but not permanently so. Basically, as soon as you have the bronze axe from the Great Pyramid, you can enter the cave and get the formula. A later trigger, however, will make the alchemist instead teach you double Drain, and that will take priority. However, if you didn't get Drain beforehand, you can enter the cave again afterwards, and he'll teach you Drain anyway. Drain costs 1 part ethanol and 2 parts root, and it'll drain the target's HP to heal the boy. Sadly, this is not a very useful formula. Even at higher levels, this spell does not have a lot of power, so it's never really going to do too much. It's also very limited in usefulness, as it can only be used to heal the boy. There's no way to get the HP transfer to heal the dog instead. It tries to be both an attack and a heal in one convenient package, and unfortunately, it doesn't really do a great job of either. Escape is another formula taught by Madronius at Horus's camp, obtained by talking to him after getting one of the Diamond Eyes. As such, like other things connected to Madronius being at the camp, Escape is permanently missable if you don't check in with him before getting the second Diamond Eye. Escape uses 1 part wax and 1 part vinegar. Using it just takes you back to the entrance of whatever dungeon you're in. Leveling this formula has no effect. Overall, it's not a super useful formula to have on hand, as you can just use the wings item if you really need a quick escape, and you should find plenty of those just checking out various gourds and pots along the way. It also doesn't help that, as mentioned earlier, vinegar isn't always easy to come by. Technically, Madronius himself does sell it though while he's there at the camp. Still, probably better to just use wings if you really need to get out fast, and thus free up a spot in your alchemy formula wheel. Double Drain is taught to you by the same alchemist that taught you the normal Drain formula, the one in the cave on the western bank. To get Double Drain, talk to him after you've defeated Aegis. From what I've read, the alchemist will prioritize teaching you Double Drain over Drain if you've met the requirements, but you can enter the cave again afterwards to obtain normal Drain if you missed it. Thus, both formulas are optional, but not permanently missable. Double Drain takes 2 parts ethanol and 2 parts vinegar. Basically, it's a stronger form of Drain, siphoning the target's HP to heal the boy, and only the boy, and doing a bit more of both damage and healing. Sadly, it's still not all that powerful, and it also has the dubious honor of being the only formula in the game to require 2 parts of both its ingredients, meaning that it'll go through both ethanol and vinegar quickly if you're using it. And with that, we've demoed all alchemy formulas from both your first trip through Prehistoria and Antiqua. There's still a lot of formulas to go, we're only halfway through, and I don't want to make this video too long. So, we're going to cover the rest of them next time. So with that, thank you very much for watching, I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well.